My parents always treated my brother as the golden child. They gave him everything, even our family's vineyard. But when he ran it into massive debt, guess who they came crawling to for $100K? Me. And that's when I decided enough was enough. Golden children are often handed success without effort. But when the responsibility actually hits, they crumble. And sadly, it's the scapegoat child, the one they ignored, who's expected to fix the mess. But what happens when that scapegoat finally refuses? In this story, you'll see how my parents' favoritism led to the downfall of our family vineyard, how my brother squandered everything, and how I turned the tables when they begged me to rescue them with my hard-earned money. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. I bring you stories of family betrayal, revenge, and justice. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens in this. Part 1. Growing up in the shadow of the golden child. If you grew up with a golden child in the family, then you already know how the story goes. From the moment we were kids, my brother Daniel was the chosen one, the favorite, the heir apparent, and me? I was the reliable one, the background noise, the afterthought. It wasn't subtle either. My parents wore their favoritism like a badge of honor. I remember being 8 years old, running home from school with my very first spelling bee trophy. I was beaming, so excited to show them. But the moment I walked into the living room, Daniel was already there, showing off his new soccer medal. My dad lifted him onto his shoulders, cheering like he'd won the World Cup. When I timidly held up my trophy, my mom gave me a quick smile. "That's nice, dear. Go put it in your room." That was it. No hugs, no cheers, not even a picture for the fridge. It became a pattern. If Daniel brought home a B+, they threw a pizza party. If I brought home an A+, they barely looked up from the TV. Birthdays were the same. Daniel got big parties with balloons, cakes shaped like dinosaurs, piles of gifts. My birthdays? A store-bought cake and a "we'll celebrate properly later." That never happened. The favoritism wasn't just about medals or birthdays. It was baked into the very fabric of our family legacy, the vineyard. The vineyard had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandparents poured their lives into it, my parents expanded it, and everyone assumed it would pass to the next worthy heir. And of course, that heir was Daniel. From the time he was 12, my father would take him on vineyard tours, teaching him about fermentation, harvest cycles, marketing. I wanted to tag along. I asked more than once. "Not today," my father would say, waving me off. "You're still too young. Daniel needs to learn first." Too young? Daniel was only a year older than me. But in their eyes, he was always just right. As teenagers, the gap only widened. Daniel strutted around school with new clothes, courtesy of our parents. I wore hand-me-downs. He got a car for his 16th birthday, a used BMW. I got bus fare. Teachers would call my parents to praise my grades. My mom would nod politely and change the subject to Daniel's soccer games. I'll never forget the night I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "Daniel is going to be the one," my dad said proudly. "He's got the charisma, the charm. He'll carry the family business into the future." "And what about me?" I whispered under my breath from the hallway, but the answer was clear. I wasn't part of the plan. By the time I graduated high school, I stopped waiting for their approval. If they wouldn't see me, I'd see myself. I got into college on a scholarship, working part-time jobs to cover what my parents refused to help with. Daniel, meanwhile, got a fully paid tuition, a new laptop, and a dorm room decorated by my mom herself. I didn't complain. In fact, I used it as fuel. I studied harder, worked longer, saved every penny. If I wasn't going to inherit the vineyard, then I'd build my own empire elsewhere. By my mid-20s, I was financially stable, a career I built with my own hands, a savings account that grew every year, independence that no one could take from me. And Daniel? He was still floating on the cushion of parental support, never facing consequences, never being told no. Looking back now, I realize something. Favoritism doesn't just spoil the golden child, it cripples them. Because when you never have to work for anything, you never learn how to hold on to it. I didn't know it at the time, But that truth would soon play out in the biggest way possible. Because when my parents finally handed Daniel the keys to the family vineyard, the very legacy of our bloodline, it wouldn't take long for him to burn it all to the ground. Part 2. Daniel takes over the vineyard. When my parents officially handed Daniel the keys to the vineyard, it was treated like a royal coronation. I still remember that day. They invited extended family, business partners, even the local newspaper, to witness history. My father gave a speech about passing the torch to the next generation. My mother wiped tears from her eyes, saying, "We couldn't be prouder of our son." Notice she said son, not children, because in their eyes, I didn't exist in this story. Daniel stood there in an expensive suit, puffed up like a peacock, smiling for the cameras. I stood in the back, hands in my pockets, just another face in the crowd. From day one, Daniel acted like the vineyard was his personal playground. He strutted through the fields, barking orders at workers who had been there, longer than we'd been alive. Men and women who had worked beside my grandparents, who knew the vines better than anyone, were suddenly told they were doing things wrong. He told them his vision would modernize everything. Buying top-of-the-line equipment, worth hundreds of thousands, even though the old machines worked just fine. Hosting over-the-top wine tastings with live bands and catered food, which cost more than they earned. Hiring his unqualified friends into management positions with fat salaries, while laying off workers who actually understood the craft. It wasn't about improving the vineyard. It was about showing off. At why? First, my parents defended everything he did. When he bought 3 luxury delivery trucks instead of repairing the old ones, they said, he's investing in growth. When he threw a wine launch party that cost $50,000 and barely sold 100 bottles, they said, he's thinking big. When the old vineyard manager, a man who had worked there for 30 years, quit after clashing with Daniel, they said, well, maybe it was time for new leadership anyway. But the cracks were already forming. Orders started getting delayed. Longtime customers began complaining. Bills piled up faster than they could be paid. My parents' denial, I tried to warn them. One evening, I sat across from my father at the dinner table. Dad, I've been looking at the vineyard's numbers. They don't add up. Expenses are skyrocketing, and revenue isn't keeping pace. He waved me off. You wouldn't understand. Daniel is taking us into the future. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. Sure, I said, but there's a difference between investing and bleeding cash. At this rate, the vineyard won't last 5 years. He slammed his fork down. Enough! You're just jealous. Daniel is doing fine. Jealous. That word cut deep. After years of being ignored, I wasn't jealous. I was realistic. But my parents couldn't see it. Daniel's arrogance, if anything. My warnings only made Daniel more reckless. Relax, he told me smugly one night, glass of wine in hand. You've always been the cautious one. That's why you'll never be more than average. Me? I take risks. That's what leaders do. Leaders? I replied, don't gamble with other people's legacies. He smirked. Legacy is nothing without flair. Watch me. I'll turn this vineyard into something people talk about for decades. Well, he was half right. People would talk about it for decades, but not for the reasons he imagined. The downward spiral within 2 years, the debts began to suffocate the business. Suppliers weren't getting paid on time. Loyal customers walked away after being ignored in favor of Daniel's flashy events. The vineyard that once stood as a symbol of tradition and pride had become a money pit, draining faster than anyone could fill it. Still, my parents defended him. He just needs more time, they insisted. All businesses struggle in the beginning. Beginning? The vineyard had been profitable for decades. The only struggle was Daniel's incompetence. Watching the collapse, I'd visit occasionally, more out of curiosity than obligation. Each time it looked worse. Weeds creeping through unmaintained vines, workers leaving mid-shift, unpaid bills stacked on the office desk. But Daniel still walked around like a king, sipping wine he hadn't paid for, boasting about big deals that never existed. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. You could see the destruction coming, but nobody at the wheel was willing to hit the brakes. My silent decision, as much as it hurt to watch my grandparents' legacy crumble, I knew one thing for certain. I would not be the one to fix his mess. He had been given everything. He had been praised, spoiled, and defended his entire life. If the vineyard collapsed under his leadership, then let it collapse. Because sometimes, the only way golden children learn is when they finally face the consequences of the crown they begged for, and Daniel's crown was about to turn into ashes. Part 3, the vineyard's collapse. For a while, Daniel managed to keep up the illusion. He dressed the part of a successful businessman. Tailored suits, polished shoes, sunglasses perched on his head like he was some celebrity vintner. He'd stroll through town shaking hands, talking about his next big plan. But behind the glossy image, the vineyard was bleeding to death. It started small, a few late payments to suppliers. Then the electricity bills slipped behind. Then the bank began calling about loans Daniel had taken out without even telling. My parents. I only found out because an old employee, loyal to my grandparents' memory, called me one afternoon. "You need to know what's happening," she whispered. "Your brother, he's drowning this place." She told me checks were bouncing, paychecks were delayed, and vendors had stopped delivering grapes because invoices sat unpaid for months. It wasn't just bad business, it was deliberate neglect. Daniel refused to cut costs. Instead, he doubled down on extravagance. He hosted another wine tasting festival, this time with fireworks, a live orchestra, and imported chefs. The price tag? Nearly $80,000. The revenue? Barely $10,000. When my father questioned him, Daniel waved a hand. "You have to spend big to make big, Dad. Don't worry, I've got investors lined up." But those investors never existed. At one point, Daniel even flew to Napa Valley for networking. He stayed in 5-star hotels, drank $1,000 bottles of wine, and posted pictures of himself to social media with captions like, "Building the future of our family legacy." Meanwhile, the workers back home couldn't even get gloves. Replaced for harvest. The vineyard once had loyal customers who had bought our wines for decades. Couples who came every anniversary, restaurants that carried our bottles exclusively, tourists who returned every season. But Daniel neglected them. Orders arrived late, bottles were mislabeled, shipments went missing, calls went unanswered. Within a year, those loyal customers had moved on to other vineyards. Once they left, they never came back. It all came crashing down one summer evening. Got a call from my mother, her voice shaking. "The bank is threatening foreclosure," she whispered. "They say the vineyard is 6 months behind on payments. They've already seized some of the equipment." I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of anger and grim inevitability. "How much debt are we talking about?" She hesitated. "Close to $900,000. I nearly dropped the phone. Almost $1 million in debt. In just a few years, Daniel had turned a profitable, respected business into a sinking ship that no amount of patchwork could save. For the first time in his life, Daniel looked rattled. Gone was the smug grin, the arrogance. He stopped posting on social media. He started avoiding family gatherings. When I saw him next, he looked thinner, more stressed. "It's just a rough patch," he insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "I've got a plan. I just need some capital to turn it around." But I could see the desperation in his eyes. For the first time, he realized charm couldn't save him. That's when my parents stepped in, not with solutions, not with accountability, but with denial. They begged suppliers for extensions. They mortgaged part of their home. They defended Daniel even as the vineyard's name turned into a local joke. One evening, I overheard my father muttering to my mother, "We can't let him fail. It'll ruin the family name." Fail? He already had. The only thing left was to see how deep the hole would go. The call for help, and then, inevitably, the call came. My parents showed up at my apartment, dressed nicely but with exhaustion etched into their faces. They smiled too wide, spoke too sweetly. "We just need a little help," my father said. "About 100,000. It'll cover the most urgent debts and buy us time to turn things around." 100,000. Like it was pocket change. I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to give you 6 figures? After you gave Daniel the entire vineyard, ignored every warning, and let him destroy it?" My mother clasped her hands. You've done so well for yourself. You have savings. You could do this for the family. Family. That word again. Used not as love, but as a leash. My silent rage, I wanted to scream, to throw every memory of neglect, every dismissal, every instance of favoritism back in their faces. But instead, I sat calmly and said, why not ask Daniel? He's the heir. He's the one you trusted. They flinched. My father cleared his throat. He doesn't have the funds. No, I said. He doesn't have the responsibility. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The stages set in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about years of being treated like the afterthought, the scapegoat, the backup plan. And now, when their golden child's shine had dulled to rust, they wanted me to polish the mess, but I wasn't their safety net anymore. This time, I would let the pieces fall. Part 4, the confrontation. They didn't just ask once. No. My parents came back again and again, their voices soft one moment, sharp the next, as though trying on different masks until one might convince me. The visit one evening, I came home from work to find them waiting on my porch. My mother smiled too brightly, clutching a basket of fruit she'd obviously picked up from the store on the way. My father stood behind her, stiff, his jaw tight. Can we come in? My mother asked sweetly. I wanted to say no. I wanted to turn them away just like they had turned me away 1,000 times before. But I let them in, partly out of habit, partly out of curiosity. We sat in my living room. The fruit basket sat untouched on the coffee table. My parents perched on the couch, like nervous salespeople about to pitch a deal. The pleamy father cleared his throat. We've been thinking, the Vineyard, it just needs one more push, a lifeline. If we can cover the immediate debts, Daniel can turn it around. My mother jumped in quickly, her hands clasped. You've always been so responsible. You saved so well. You're the only one who can do this. Just 100,000. It will save everything. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, pleading. And Daniel? He wasn't even there. His absence. That was the part that infuriated me most. The so-called heir, the golden child, the one who had run the vineyard into the ground. He didn't even have the guts to face me himself. He sent our parents like errand boys, hoping their guilt trips would succeed where his arrogance had failed. It was always like that. He got the glory, they did the defending, and I was left holding the scraps. My response. Sat back in my chair, folding my arms. Let me get this straight. You gave Daniel the entire vineyard. He mismanaged it into almost $1 million in debt. And now you want me to hand over 100,000 of my own hard-earned money to fix his mistakes? My father stiffened. It's not about mistakes. It's about family. This vineyard is our legacy. Legacy? I repeated, my voice sharper now. Don't talk to me about legacy. Legacy is something you nurture, something you protect. You handed it to Daniel on a silver platter and watched him burn it down. That's not legacy. That's favoritism. That's blindness. The guilt trips. My mother's eyes welled with tears. Please. You know we always believed in both of you. But Daniel needed more support. You were always the strong one. We thought you didn't need us. I laughed bitterly. So let me get this right. I was ignored, dismissed, treated like an afterthought. But that was because you thought I was strong? That's not a compliment, Mom. That's neglect. My father's face reddened. We're not here to debate the past. We're asking for your help now. And I'm telling you no, I said firmly. Their shock. The silence after that was thick. My parents stared at me as though I had spoken a foreign language. In their world, I had always been the one who complied, who stayed quiet, who did what was asked without complaint. Hearing me say no was unthinkable. My mother's voice cracked. If you don't help, the vineyard will be gone. Do you want that on your conscience? I leaned forward. No, Mom. That will be on yours, on Dad's, on Daniel's. You handed him everything, and he destroyed it. If the vineyard dies, it's because you let him kill it, not me." The note I pulled out my checkbook. My mother's eyes lit up with hope until she saw what I wrote. Not a check, just a single sentence on the paper. "Sell the vineyard. You lost it. Don't call me again." I slid it across the table. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's lip trembled. Neither of them reached for it. The golden child's silence. Finally, Daniel appeared at the door, having waited in the car. He shuffled, awkwardly avoiding my eyes. His once flashy clothes looked wrinkled now, his swagger replaced with a nervous shuffle. "You could help, you know," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "You've got the money. Why won't you?" I stared at him, decades of resentment, bubbling up. "Because you need to learn what it feels like to fail. You wanted the vineyard. You wanted the crown. Now wear it, even if it crushes you." He said nothing. For once in his life, the golden child had no defense, no arrogance, no comeback. Just silence. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "We're done here," I said. "Take your fruit basket with you." They left in silence, the basket still on the table. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Because I realized something. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I wasn't the family's backup plan. I was free. Part 5. The Fallout. The night they walked out of my house, I knew something had broken. Not just in the vineyard, but in the very foundation of our family. For decades, the vineyard was their crown jewel, their pride. Now it was nothing but a rotting reminder of favoritism gone wrong. And without my bailout, there was no lifeline left. The decline wasn't instant. It was slow, painful, and very public. First, the workers left. They hadn't been paid in weeks, some in months. Many of them had worked for my grandparents and loved the vineyard, but loyalty doesn't feed families. They packed up their tools and walked away, leaving the fields untended. Next, the suppliers cut ties. Grapes stopped arriving, bottles, corks, labels, all the things needed to produce. Wine dried up. No one wanted to risk selling to a vineyard with a reputation for bouncing checks. Then came the customers. Longtime restaurants pulled the wines from their menus, stores cleared their shelves, tourists stopped showing up to tastings that no longer existed. The once lively vineyard was silent. Weeds crept between the rows. Machines sat idle. The grand events Daniel once boasted about were replaced by padlocked gates. I heard from relatives that my parents grew frantic. They mortgaged their home, drained their savings, even tried borrowing from friends. But it was like throwing pebbles into a sinking ship. The hole was too wide, the debts too deep. At church, my mother tried to put on a brave face, smiling too brightly, insisting, "It's just a rough patch. Daniel will turn it around." But the whispers followed her down every aisle. My father, once the proud patriarch who bragged about his son's vision, now walked with slumped shoulders. He stopped attending community meetings, stopped looking people in the eye. The shame clung to him like a second skin. And Daniel? The golden child who once strutted like a king was now reduced to a shadow of himself. Gone were the tailored suits, the confident smirk, the champagne toasts. He stopped posting on social media. His flashy friends, the ones he had hired into cushy jobs, disappeared the moment the paycheck stopped. Relatives said he was drinking heavily, hiding in the house, snapping at anyone who mentioned the vineyard. The man who thought he could conquer the wine industry was now too afraid to show his face in public. The family whispers, our extended family wasted no time in dissecting the disaster. At every gathering, I heard the same whispers. We always knew. Daniel wasn't ready. Why would your parents give him everything and ignore you? If they had just listened, maybe the vineyard could have survived. Irony burned in my chest. These were the same people who once praised Daniel, who called him visionary, who cheered at his over-the-top parties. Now they shook their heads in judgment, as though they had seen the truth all along. But their whispers didn't bother me. If anything, they confirmed what I had known for years. Favoritism blinds people. And when the truth comes out, it comes out hard. My parents called me one last time. My mother's voice was tired, broken. "The bank is seizing the vineyard," she whispered. "We're losing everything." I closed my eyes, feeling both sorrow and vindication. "No, Mom," I said softly. "You lost everything the moment you put all your faith in Daniel and none in me." She cried. My father got on the line, his voice hard. "You'll regret this. Family always sticks together," I answered calmly. "Family sticks together when family treats each other equally. You didn't, and now you're reaping what you sowed." I hung up before he could reply. A month later, the vineyard was auctioned off. I didn't attend the auction, but I saw the pictures online. Strangers walking the rows of vines, inspecting the land like vultures picking over a carcass. The family crest that once hung proudly over the gates was ripped down. That was the end. 3 generations of sweat, sacrifice, and tradition, gone in less than 5 years under Daniel's leadership, and for the first time, it wasn't my burden to carry. When Malfour, the dust settled, I realized something powerful. I wasn't sad. I wasn't mourning the vineyard the way my parents did, because for me, the vineyard was never mine to begin with. They made sure of that. They excluded me, dismissed me, told me it wasn't my place. So when it crumbled, it wasn't my loss. It was theirs, and in that realization, I felt free. Free from their expectations, their guilt trips, their manipulation. The golden child had fallen, the legacy had burned, and I had nothing to do with it. Part 6. My independence. While my parents scrambled and Daniel drowned in his own arrogance, my life flourished. It wasn't luck. It wasn't handed to me. It was years of discipline, of hard choices, of working twice as hard for half the TU. Recognition. And now, all that effort was finally paying off. My own path. I had built a career outside the vineyard long before the collapse. No one guided me. No one funded me. I worked nights, took risks, and saved diligently while my parents poured every dime and ounce of attention into Daniel's so-called future. And it showed. While they were begging suppliers for extensions, I was sitting in my apartment looking at a healthy savings account. While Daniel was sulking in debt, I was investing in stocks, real estate, and my own small business ventures. For the first time in my life, I didn't just survive, I thrived. Watching from afar, relatives would update me on my parents and Daniel. "They're really struggling," one cousin whispered over the phone. "Your mom can't stop crying. Your dad looks like he's aged 10 years. Others asked, "Don't you feel guilty, knowing you could have helped?" I smiled, even if they couldn't see it. "No," I replied. "I don't feel guilty at all. Because I didn't cause their downfall. They did. And that's the truth. Why should I sacrifice my stability, my future, for people who never once believed in me?" Daniel's decline. Daniel's fall was the harshest of all. The golden boy, once paraded around as the future of the family, now had nothing. No vineyard, no respect, no friends who weren't paid to be there. I heard he was back in my parents' house, lying around all day, blaming everyone but himself. "The economy killed us," he told people. "Suppliers sabotaged me. It wasn't my fault. It was always someone else's fault, never his." Meanwhile, I knew the truth. Daniel failed because he never learned accountability. He was never told no. He was never made to face consequences. Until now. My parents' silence. For months, my parents didn't speak to me. At first, I thought it was anger. Then I realized it was shame. They couldn't bear to face the child they had ignored, dismissed, and underestimated. The same child who now stood stronger than all of them. One day, my mother finally called. Her voice was quiet, shaky. We're proud of you," she said. For a second, I almost laughed. Proud? They hadn't been proud when I earned scholarships, when I landed my first big job, When I bought my first home, they were only proud now because they had nothing left to cling to. "Thank you," I said flatly. But deep down, I knew it was too late. Words don't erase years of neglect. The power of no, refusing to give them $100K, wasn't just about money. It was about breaking the cycle. All my life, I had been the backup plan, the one they'd turn to when Daniel messed up, the scapegoat they expected to pick up the pieces. Saying no was the first time I truly stood up for myself. And it was liberating. No guilt, no second guessing. Just peace. My new life. With the vineyard gone, people expected me to feel bitter. But I didn't. I started traveling. Something I never got to do growing up while every dollar went to Daniel's. Whims. I invested in things that brought me joy. Hobbies, learning, friendships. I surrounded myself with people who saw me, valued me, appreciated me. I didn't need a vineyard to define my worth. I didn't need my parents' validation. I had built something far stronger: independence. Here's the funny thing about revenge. Sometimes it isn't about dramatic confrontations or shouting matches. Sometimes it's simply about living well, while those who wronged you collapse under the weight of their own mistakes. That was my revenge. Not slamming doors, not screaming at family dinners, just standing tall while their empire crumbled, and mine quietly grew. Because nothing stings more than realizing the child you dismissed, the one you thought would always be there to clean up your mess, doesn't need you at all. Inner peace, I kept those words close every day. Sell the vineyard, don't call me again. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. It was the line in the sand that freed me from decades of being the overlooked child. And in the end, that peace was worth far more than $100,000. When I look back at everything, the favoritism, the neglect, the downfall of the vineyard, I realize this story was never about grapes, or wine, or even money. It was about choices. Theirs. And mine. What my parents chose Daniel. They chose him when they lifted him on their shoulders for a B+ while ignoring my A+. They chose him when they gave him cars, clothes, and celebrations while I got silence. They chose him when they handed him the vineyard without question, without balance, without even considering me. They chose blindness. They chose to ignore reality because favoritism is a sweet poison. It tastes good at first, but it kills everything it touches. And in the end, that poison didn't just hurt me. It destroyed them. What Daniel chose. Daniel chose arrogance. He chose to believe charm could replace hard work. He chose to treat the vineyard as his playground instead of a business. He chose extravagance, ego, and denial over responsibility. He thought being the golden child made him untouchable. He thought consequences were for other people. He thought the crown meant power, not weight. And when the vineyard collapsed, he finally learned what I had known all along. Crowns made of favoritism. Always rust and me, I chose peace. For years, I stayed quiet. I worked in the shadows, building my life, saving my money, creating independence while they dismissed me. I could have given them $100,000. I could have bailed them out, patched the sinking ship, prolonged the inevitable. But that would have meant stepping back into the role they always wanted for me, the backup plan. The scapegoat, the silent fixer. Instead, I chose to say no, to let the pieces fall, to watch them live in the world they created, a world where Daniel was the center and I was invisible, and by saying no, I freed myself. Here's what people don't want to admit about families. Sometimes the golden child is not a blessing. They are a curse. Because when parents put all their eggs in one basket, when they give one child everything and the other nothing, they aren't building legacy. They are gambling, and when that gamble fails, they expect the overlooked child to pay the price. But that's not legacy. That's exploitation. So what's the lesson here? That favoritism doesn't just hurt the child who's ignored, it cripples the one who's favored. That money, legacy, and pride mean nothing without responsibility. That sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away, even if it means watching something you love collapse. Because peace is worth more than vineyards. Peace is worth more than legacy. Peace is worth more than $100,000. I didn't save the vineyard. I didn't save my parents from their choices. I didn't save Daniel from himself, but I saved me. And sometimes, saving yourself is the only rescue mission that matters. Closing words. So, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the scapegoat, the afterthought, remember this. You are not their backup plan. You are not their safety net. You are not their fixer. You are your own person. And the sweetest revenge you can ever serve isn't a dramatic speech, or a slammed door, or even justice handed down in front of everyone. The sweetest revenge is simply this: living well, living free, and refusing to carry the weight of mistakes that were never yours to bear. Because in the end, peace isn't just priceless. Peace is power.